Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder as I leave the game store and deliver an episode to you while I walk around. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good afternoon, listeners. It's a lovely day here in suburban Chicago. The clouds are out and it looks like it might rain, but it's not going to rain, I don't think, at least not while I'm walking home. I dropped my son off to play Dungeons & Dragons over at the game store, and I'm now walking home to relax and have a nice Saturday afternoon. In that regard, I thought while I was walking home, I would record a podcast for you. And as I'm catching up on my regular features and updating you on things I've done, it feels like time to do another list episode. And this would be movies. Now, in the podcast, I usually either month or every other month, I will do an episode exploring what films I've watched since last time I told you about watching films. In this case, July had a fair number of movies, but June was almost movie-free. In fact, I only recorded one movie in June. So, rather than doing an episode where I talk about one movie for 15 minutes, I'm going to do one episode talking about June and July, and you'll get a little bit of each of those. So there we go. So what I'll do, if you're not familiar with this episode, usually what it is to talk about the movie a little bit, what I thought of it, and then what game themes or game ideas can come out of it that you can use to talk about a game or games. All right, so along those lines, in June, toward the end of June, in fact, I did watch one movie. I watched Renfield. Renfield, of course, is the name of Dracula's thrall, a sort of madman who is psychically linked to Dracula and made to do the bidding of the Dark Prince, the Dark Vampire Prince. In the original book, he's sort of famously one of the doctor's patients in the insane asylum, and he eats bugs to get their life. Sort of in emulation of Dracula, but also interestingly, this is a real life phenomenon that happens. There are people who are afflicted with this condition where they will eat bugs to try to get the bug's life from them. And apparently, at least I remember hearing this, psychologists call this Renfield syndrome, named after the character in the book. Well, this novel, or this film, takes the idea of Renfield and advances it forward. In the story, Renfield was originally Dracula's thrall, and it turns out that when he enthralls you, he gives you some of his powers, in this case, his immortality. And so Renfield has been serving Dracula, helping him find victims, and then when things get too public, he rescues Dracula and takes him away and takes him to another place where no one's looking for them, and they start rebuilding. In the story, Renfield is now in modern-day Los Angeles, and he's helping Dracula once again, and the story goes from there, basically. It is a horror comedy movie. In particular, Renfield, played by Nicholas Hoult, is a sort of lovable doofus, and he teams up with the police officer, played by Awkwafina, brilliantly, as she always does. And part of the premise that they give is that one of the other powers he has given to Renfield is the power to fight or move preternaturally. He has extra strength and he's very fast, but he only gets that by eating bugs. So then we get back to the idea of Renfield eating bugs, only in this case Renfield is eating bugs in order to fight on Dracula's behalf. It's a very silly movie. Really amusing action sequences, but extremely gory and extremely silly. Nicolas Cage is cast as Dracula in some of the best scenery chewing scenes I've ever seen. He really just way overdoes it in an excellent way and makes the movie very enjoyable. That's Renfield. Now, if you wanted to play a game sort of themed around this, the two I can think of, one would be Horrified. Dracula is one of the Universal monsters, and he is lurking around the town, and you have to defeat him. Alternately, you could play Fury of Dracula, in which you play hunters of Dracula. In neither case can you be Dracula's helper or have the superpowers indicated therein. So that part is harder to think about how you'd play it out in a board game. But I think either Fury of Dracula, if you had a longer evening, or Horrified, if you had a shorter one, would be a fine coupling to go with Renfield. And that was the entirety of my June viewing. Boom, done. I watched 6 movies in July, so I will talk about those a little bit here until I get home. The first one I want to talk about is Jurassic World Dominion. This is the third of the Jurassic World trilogy, which is of course the second trilogy in the Jurassic Park universe. In Jurassic World Dominion, it follows along after the second one, Jurassic World 2, Worlds on Excitement. I don't remember what the second Jurassic World is called. In that one, you have an extra silent partner who helped found Jurassic Park, played by James Cromwell, of course. So at the end of the movie, the dinosaurs are freed. They go running around in the world. And so Jurassic World Dominion picks up months or years after that. It's not entirely clear how long it's been, but it's been long enough that most of the characters are established doing something else. And the dinosaur population has gotten big enough that they are all over the place in terms of being all over the world and integrating with biology. It feels like the point of this movie was to have dinosaurs be all over the place, or at least the world with dinosaurs in it had expanded. That said, it felt like they had two different ideas about what stories they might tell. On one hand, you have a kind of industrial espionage, evil science story, which frankly is what all of Jurassic Park has been. They brought back Dodgson, which I thought was great. He was the secret agent who tried to get Dennis Nedry to steal the Jurassic Park embryos, and they bring him back as his company has always been there competing for dinosaur stuff, and then they pick up the pieces after Jurassic World. So he's the main villain. And the two stories are, on one hand, you have these super predator grasshopper or locusts that are new versions of the prehistoric locusts that would have been around in dinosaur times, and they're of course killing everything. And then on the other side of that coin, you have the little girl and you have Blue, and apparently those two are genetically special in some way, and so they've been kidnapped so that the evil company could figure out why they're special. And those two stories going together make up the main plot of the movie, but it's really just nonsense and not great in many ways. The dinosaurs running around are fun, the action sequences are good, but ultimately the story just doesn't hold up. It's really not what you'd hope it would be. Of course, if you're going to play a board game while talking about a dinosaur park, you have a couple options: Dinosaur Island and Dinosaur World, which are two different dinosaur theme park games. There's also Dino Genesis, which I know that people on the Secret Cabal prefer. I have not played that one. I have played Dinosaur Island. And then I also have Welcome to Dino World, which is a roll and write that I am pretty fond of, actually. I think it's a lot of fun and fits well in the theme. So a variety of different options for dinosaur stuff if you wanted to play a game that has dinosaurs in it to go with Jurassic World Dominion. I'm going to mention very quickly a couple of movies that I watched that are a little shorter to talk about. One, my wife and I watched the documentary about Wham, just called Wham. It was all about the early days of George Michael and the other guy from Wham who started this band when they were in high school and rode it to a significantly high level of fame before George Michael went off and did his own thing. Andrew Ridgeley, I think, is the name of the other member of Wham. And part of the cool thing about it is it looks like Andrew Ridgeley firmly understands and firmly asserts that he was a significant part of Wham. He and George Michael together made the band what it was, but he also recognized that George Michael was an ascendant talent and that his place in music was really in partnership with George Michael. And so when it came time, he sort of gracefully agreed to end Wham. And it sounds like he always was very enthusiastic about George Michael. Of course, Andrew Ridgeley is here to tell that story. George Michael is not. And the movie seems to be pretty pro Wham. But nonetheless, it was pretty interesting. I also watched Pinball, The Man Who Saved the Game, which was about the fact that up until relatively recently, the 70s at least, pinball was seen as a gambling game, and a lot of big cities had outlawed pinball. And it's about a person who was very good at pinball. Pinball was a sort of key part of his life, and he wrote the definitive book about pinball, and then he went before the New York Committee of Gaming or whatever and demonstrated that pinball is a game of skill, not a game of chance, and thus falls outside of the boundaries of the kinds of legislation they were using to keep it illegal. It's a very light movie with a very low dramatic arc, meaning that while there are moments that are upsetting or sad for the characters, none of them is outrageous. None of them is going to get you too stressed. It's a nice movie. I really like it, and it's well worth checking out if you get a chance. Highly recommend, because I really enjoyed it. That's Pinball, The Man Who Saved the Game. I guess if you wanted to play a game that goes with pinball, you should probably play Super Skill Pinball, of course, which is a game that really feels like you're playing pinball. A lot more chance in that than apparently there is in real pinball, but nonetheless. All right, so I have a couple more movies to talk about here. In case I don't get a chance, we watched the Barbie movie, which I thought was really good. If you haven't seen it, definitely take a chance. It is really funny. It's a great discussion of gender roles in our society today, in particular, a skewering of the way that patriarchy hurts both men and women. And I thought it was excellent. I'm not sure what game you would play with that. I mean, if you wanted to play a game that had a particularly feminist bent, you could play something like Her Story. That would fit. Otherwise, the Votes for Women would be another one if you wanted to play a game that kind of fit that narrative. Overall, though, not really a game that lends itself to a movie that lends itself to a game. We watched The Outlaws, which was a movie about a guy who is dating this woman, and it turns out that her parents are international bank robbers, and he ends up getting tangled up in their mess when they come to visit. It's pretty funny, has a lot of heart, and has Adam Devine in it, who's an actor I usually enjoy, but I hadn't seen him in a leading role yet, and I thought he did pretty well. I guess you could play Burgle Bros or Burgle Brothers as your heist game, or there's always the Vital Lacerda game, Getaway Plan, which is also about having conducted a heist, and that fits the narrative much better, actually, than Burgle Bros for The Outlaws. So I recommend The Outlaws. It's funny. Pierce Brosnan and Ellen Barkin are both very funny as the in-laws. And then finally, Happiness for Beginners. This is a enjoyable little rom-com about a woman who has had a life setback, and so she goes on a hike and discovers life and romance while on the hike. The woman is played by Ellie Kemper, who is an actor I really enjoy, and I'm looking forward to seeing more stuff with her in it. I guess if you want to play a romantic comedy, Fog of Love would be your game of choice. It's a fun one that helps you explore the notion of telling a story, and I like it. It is sort of a romantic comedy movie story generator. So if you have a chance to play that, that might be a nice coupling for something like Happiness for Beginners. So those are the movies that I watched in June and July. What films did you watch? Head over to Board Game Geek Guild 3269 and share your movie watching experience. Otherwise, thanks for tuning in, and I look forward to talking to you next time. I hope your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.